Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories, each one inspired by true events. This is episode 13. Let the nightmare begin. The Bone Collector's Keepsake. I remember the first time I ever saw Grandpa's hand. I was a little kid at the time, and I didn't know the story behind it. Nobody did, as I found out. It was just a skeleton hand he'd picked up somewhere. When I first saw it, of course, I was frightened. I'd never seen a skeleton before, at least not in person. And this was a human hand, just sitting in a box among all of our old stuff. When I'd asked my mom about it, she told me it was Grandpa's. I, of course, being a little kid, was horrified, assuming she meant it had actually been part of Grandpa's body. Why would we keep part of Grandpa? Grandpa Callahan. He was on my mom's side of the family. He died long before I was even born. I've been told this before, so it was easy for me to think it was actually his bony old hand sitting in that box. No, honey, my mom exclaimed, as I panicked like any ordinary child would. It's not actually his hand. He just found it someplace and brought it home with him. Naturally, I was confused. Why would anybody just pick up an old hand and take it home? I asked this and my mom shrugged. He just thought it was cool, she replied casually. I wrinkled up my little nose, put off by the thought of somebody thinking it would be cool to keep someone else's bones around their house. As I grew, I stopped worrying about the hand so much. It became a distant thought in the back of my head. And as the days and months and years went by, I actually started to think it was kind of cool too. Just something that comes with age, I guess. After a while, we started showing it off. We kept it in a safe place, of course. It was old and only held together by wires. And it was already missing a thumb bone. I'd always wondered why that one bone was missing, but nobody else seemed to know either. My parents always told me it was just missing when Grandpa had found it. I would think sometimes about what would cause someone to lose just one little bone from their hand. I eventually stopped worrying about it. It probably just got separated from the rest of the bones in the hand at some point. Washed away by water or blown off into the distance by wind, probably. Or maybe it was still buried deep in the ground around where Grandpa had originally found the hand. In any case, it wasn't here. It was part of what made the hand cool, though. It gave it character and made it different and interesting. As I began to find it cool, I started getting the same weird kick out of telling people who asked about it, that it was my grandpa's hand. I finally understood, as a teenager, why my parents and sister always said it that way. When company would see it and ask about it, it was silly, but it was a fun, harmless way to mess with people the first time they'd come over. And see the hand hanging up on a wall or was sitting on a shelf. Ugh, where'd that hand come from? They'd ask, and one of us would always grin and say, "Oh, that's our grandpa's hand." Of course, that would get weird looks and startled, "Are you serious?" responses. Then the family would share a laugh and one of us would explain that it was just one he discovered one day and decided to keep. Everyone else started thinking it was cool too. There was one thing though, I always got a weird feeling around the hand. It was kind of creepy having a human hand around, and I think back to when I was a kid and I first saw it. I didn't like that it was always out in the open, which was why I was secretly glad when my older sister decided to make a shadow box for us to keep it in. It was a nice box, too, black, velveteen fabric lining the back, clear, sturdy glass, nice, dark-stained wood, and even a little golden latch to keep it closed up, so the hand wouldn't get dusty. I especially liked the fact that it had a latch. Something about being able to make sure the box stayed closed made me feel more comfortable. My only regret, especially after what would happen down the road, is that it never had a lock on it. You see, I started noticing things a few months back, things that probably should have raised more questions than they did at the time. I began noticing odd noises. First off, subtle things, really, light scratchings and taps that most people would write off as normal background house sounds. Things shifting and settling. It helped that we had dogs, too. Of course, someone with dogs in their home would think of random taps and scratching sounds as simply being the dog's nails as they walked around the house. I usually did too. But sometimes, late at night, when I knew all of our dogs were asleep, curled up next to my dad in his bed, I'd hear the noises, and they'd seem much too close to me. I'd look around, and of course see nothing. As time passed, though, the noises started changing. I'd hear a sort of grating sound, like someone pushing on something that wasn't willing to move. Sometimes I'd hear something like wood splintering, but there was never any sign of anything being broken. No little shards of busted wood around any of the furniture or doors. I figured it was my imagination. I had a habit of playing horror games or listening to readings of scary stories late at night, even though I should have known better. But what fun are those kinds of things if you don't do them in the right atmosphere? So I ignored most of it, occasionally getting a little freaked out, but otherwise knowing it was probably nothing. Every once in a while, I'd be helping with cleaning and feel compelled to clean the shadow box. I'd wipe the glass off with a paper towel soaked in some window cleaner, rub down the wooden outsides with furniture polish, all that good stuff. And sometimes after I was done, I'd look at the hand inside the box. I'd appreciate the structure of it, the cool, clean white bones held together by sturdy metal wires. It still kind of creeped me out, knowing it was just some poor person's disembodied hand hanging on our wall. But I knew it was just a hand. I started working nights, which meant I had to stay up on my nights off, so I wouldn't mess up my sleeping schedule. This usually meant sitting up in a comfy chair, messing around online until the break of dawn, then going downstairs to the basement, where I slept during that time, so that the light and noise of the daytime wouldn't disturb my rest. That was when things started getting really weird. Everyone knows basements are already inherently creepy. The darkness, the cool, insulated air, the dull, gray walls, and the unnatural feeling of being underground in a silent room. I got used to it for the most part, but it sure made the odd noises stand out more. Sometimes I get so creeped out by them that I'd be unable to sleep anymore, and I just move upstairs, even at the risk of not sleeping as well, as though I get any decent sleep feeling creeped out anyway. Sometimes when I was lying in my bed down there, just thinking as I try to fall asleep or go back to sleep, after getting some water or going to the bathroom, I'd hear the tapping again. It sounded louder down in that eerily quiet basement room. Of course, with my habit of doing late-night creepypasta binges or playing survival horror games for hours before bed, I would get the absolute worst pictures in my mind when hearing the soft scratching sounds around me. But it always turned out to be innocent noises. At least at first it did. Then came the times when I'd feel something pulling at my blankets. Of course I'd tug on them lightly, and they'd come unstuck from the bed frame easily. But sometimes I could swear they would stick for a moment, hanging down below the frame and going tight as I jerked at them, like someone was holding the other end. It's just my imagination, I'd tell myself. Finally pulling the covers free and adjusting them over myself as I lay back down. I've been listening to too many scary stories. I need to calm down. But every so often, after I'd free my covers, things would be different. Instead of simply curling up, giggling at my own silly imaginings, I'd start to drift off. And suddenly I would feel something. It felt vaguely like something was touching me, usually on my arm, sometimes one of my feet. It was never a grabbing sensation, just an odd, light touch, like something just barely making contact, lightly on my body. After I would notice it and shift the offended body part a bit, the feeling would usually subside. This went on for months, and I never minded it that much, aside from getting chills now and then. But then, it would start coming back every so often. I'd feel that light touch shift my arm and feel fine. Then, just as sleep started to claim me again, the feeling would return. Sometimes, I'd even glance at the part of myself that felt the touch. But for the most part, there was never anything there. I did catch, once in a great while, a small streak of white as I glanced away, though. But then again, my blankets had white on them. There was one that was even fluffy, so it had a textured look to it, even in the dark of the basement. So I wasn't too concerned. Not until the noises and the touching feelings started happening together. Anyway, I'd lie in my bed, cozy and secure, when suddenly, tap, 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 tap. S-C-R-R-S-H, S-C-R-R-S-H. Then a cold, light pressure on my arm or leg. I'd look and see nothing. S-C-R-R-S-H. There would go again. The sound of something small dragging across the carpet. I'd glance hesitantly to the floor near my bed. Still no sign of anything unusual. And so it would go until I got too anxious and moved upstairs. Tap, S-C-R-R-S-H, touch, glance, nothing. This would happen so rarely that I never thought much of it until the next time it happened. I catch those little, moving glimpses of whiteness in the corners of my eyes each time, but there never seemed to be anything there. It had happened while I was up late too, on my nights off. Sitting in my chair, I'd hear the noises, but strangely, the feeling of being touched never showed up when I was sitting up alert in my chair. But still, that ever-present tapping, that eerie, scooting, dragging sound. These things persisted, stopping any time I would pause to look around. But I couldn't see anything. Every time, a quiet, innocent house around me, and nothing more. Until one night, I got up to get something to snack on a night off. I'd been on another horror game binge, and thus was feeling pretty tense. I got my snack and hurried back to my chair. As I sat down, I caught a small glint in the other room. Looking over, I saw what looked like the door to the shadow box, hanging open. Reflecting the light from the nearby computer screen, it cast an odd light as it hung there. I, of course, went over and reflexively closed it. I turned back toward my seat, ready to resume gaming, and froze. Where's the hand? I looked back inside the box, and for a moment my blood ran cold. It wasn't there, and it was nowhere else to be seen. I looked around just in case, thinking maybe it had fallen out somehow. The door was open, after all, and the latch wasn't locked because it had never had a lock. Maybe, I thought, the hand came loose from the backing, fell, and knocked the door open. But there was no spooky, skeletal hand on the floor, nor anywhere else in the room. I took a deep breath, convincing myself that I was just psyching myself out. Too many scary games in one night, I told myself. As if a bony hand with no muscles or nerves would be able to move. I was being so silly. I convinced myself that it was nothing, that one of my parents had taken out to clean it or fix something on it. It was old, after all. We didn't even know how long Grandpa had it before we'd gotten it. It may have started breaking up after an unknown number of years hanging on a wall. I went back to my chair and settled in, content in the explanation I'd given myself. That was when I heard it. S-C-R-R-S-H, 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 tap, 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 S-C-R-R-S-H. I shivered, not daring to look around this time. I saved my game file on Dead Space 2 and closed it, feeling it was clearly time for a break if I was hearing noises. It was just the tension of having been immersed in the game, after all. Nothing a good dose of funny videos wouldn't cure. I opened up YouTube and typed in a search for one of my favorite funny Let's Players. I finally started relaxing when I felt that cold, light touch right on the edge of my right forearm. All that was beside my chair was a small end table, where I usually set my laptop when I was up doing something. There couldn't be anything there, and the dogs would be barking up a storm if someone had broken in. But against my better judgment, I took a quick glance at the table next to me, expecting to see, as usual, nothing. There, resting against the arm of the chair, leaning with the bottom of its palm against the cold, wooden end table, was Grandpa's hand. Its bony little fingers sat on my skin, chilling me down to my bones. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring in horror at the pale, twitching hand. I felt like it was testing me, waiting to see if I would panic. All I remember after that is a clatter, as my laptop was tossed off my lap and hit the floor. My arm swung up, and a crack resounded from the far wall, where the hand must have hit after I sent it flying across the room. I curled up on my chair, pulling every body part that would fit on the chair as close as possible, trying to keep myself out of reach. I looked around frantically, trying to see where the hand had landed. It was nowhere in sight. I didn't sleep well that week or the rest of the month. I'd stay awake until daylight and curl up in a tight ball on my bed when I finally had to sleep. The sounds changed again. There was clicking now, the odd, hollow clicking of bones bumping against each other. Strange, rusty creaking like old metal trying to bend. I knew what it was. It was Grandpa's hand. The cracking and clicking were from it clenching itself, tapping angrily and impatiently on things as it moved. The creaking was the old metal wire that bound the bones together, squealing in protest when the hand moved. If I'd only known what it was that hand wanted, I would have tried to find the hand, would have done my best to get rid of it. I'd have smashed it, sold it, thrown it into the road where it would be run over. Anything to make it go away before it could hurt someone. It was months later when something finally happened again. By then, I'd almost forgotten the hand. The noises had even stopped, something for which I was extremely grateful. I moved on to another job by then, surprisingly, not due to being fired for falling asleep at work. As you might think, no, it was just life moving forward. Anyway, there was one night, after things had calmed down, that I started hearing something again. The fear and panic flared up, and I immediately curled close in my chair, pressing myself against the back of it. I looked around frantically and saw one of my dogs, Luna, walking out from my dad's bedroom. I relaxed, laughing at myself a little. I'd actually thought, no, that would be silly. See, it had been so long that I'd actually convinced myself the whole thing with the hand finally letting me see it, finally grabbing me, had all been a really vivid dream or a creepypasta I'd gotten a little too immersed in. I guess I just really didn't want to believe it had been real. It was too unnatural, too freaky. Assured that it was just my dog going out to the yard, I settled back down. I had just gotten back into the video I'd been watching when Luna started barking. Sighing, annoyed, I went outside to see what had her bothered. I figured it was nothing. It was probably a far-off sound only she could hear, or our neighbors being up way too late making noise like they sometimes did. And Luna always had a habit of barking nonstop at things once she got going. So I wasn't surprised that even as I called out to her to stop and come inside, she didn't. I went out to where she was, looking around with a flashlight to see if anything was there. Something was there, all right. The hand was back. It had a hold of Luna, trying to pull her closer. Its long, sharp fingertips dug into the material of her collar, jerking every few seconds, fighting her for control. I shook myself free of the initial shock of seeing it again, of realizing it was real. I kicked it as hard as I could, careful not to hit Luna by mistake. I tried to grab Luna, to carry her inside and lock everything that led to the outside world. She bit me. Hard. She'd been really, really scared by that hand, and I didn't blame her. All the same, it freaked me out when I realized that she'd taken off the end piece of my thumb. I tried to get it back, ignoring the pain and shock, ignoring the blood coming out in sharp little spurts from my now severed fingertip. But she ran off into the darkness of the backyard, still terrified. I tried to find her, but she'd hidden somewhere, and I was too freaked out to worry about it. I ran inside, woke up my dad, told him Luna had been scared by something. I wouldn't tell him what it was. I showed him my hand, and we went immediately to the hospital to get it looked at and fixed up as much as possible. I ended up having to get used to being a little less handy, please pardon the pun, because we never found the thumb. We did find Luna, though, in the yard the next morning, but she wasn't alive. It was horrible. I had always been closest to Luna out of all the dogs we'd had, so of course the sight gave me a horrible reaction. I got sick, I cried hysterically, I even fell to my knees next to what was left of her. Her stomach had been clawed open. It looked like something had ripped her belly open in a frenzy, looking for something inside her. We took Luna's body to the vet. He did an autopsy, looking in through the ready-made opening in her gut. It was really bad, and I had to stay home to avoid freaking out again. There wasn't anything inside, and some part of me knew there wouldn't be. After all, I knew what had done it. I knew what it wanted now. All the vet found were weird, dull claw marks inside the stomach lining, inside her skin, around her organs, even in her throat. Her stomach and esophagus had been shredded, but nothing else was able to tell us what exactly had happened. When my parents came home with the news, It took all I had not to burst into tears, especially later when I was outside and saw something I hadn't noticed before. A pile of skin and a little blood, and a fingernail with little scratches in it. I'd had enough. Scaring me was one thing. Touching me was bad enough. But that hand had killed my dog, the one I'd bonded most with out of all of our dogs. I hated that hand now, and I vowed that if I ever found it, I was going to crush it. I started keeping heavy objects under my bed, on my side table, on the end table near my bed. I was determined to smash the bones on that evil thing if it ever came near me again. I did see it again after a long time. It was when I woke up one night feeling something near me. I opened my eyes slowly and looked straight ahead. It was right there on the table next to my bed, right next to my pillow, and it looked different now. It had a smooth, clean new thumb bone where the missing one would have been. It wasn't entirely clean. There were traces of pink where the blood had dried on, and dirt from the hand moving around outside in the lawn. As soon as I saw it, I reached for the hammer I'd hidden under my pillow, moving slowly so I wouldn't alert the hand. Luna would have vengeance tonight. I'd make sure of it. I remember thinking one other thing as I pulled out the hammer and took aim. I remember wondering if maybe a replacement for its missing thumb wasn't all Grandpa's hand wanted. After all, the Abyss of Miramar. The tropical waters were warm, even on a night dive, but Lucas still wore a wetsuit. He switched on the video camera attached to his mask, then pressed the start button on his waterproof wristwatch. 70:00 popped up in black against a staunch gray background, and quickly turned to 69:59, then 69:58, 69:57. The countdown had begun. He pressed the diving mask tight against his face and splashed into the water. The glow from the waning moon disappeared within seconds, too weak to penetrate the deep waters of the sea. Lucas's excitement was heightened by the rich darkness. Ghosts were always more active at night. Time stood still below the water's surface where darkness expanded endlessly in every direction. Bubbles rose from Lucas's mask as he exhaled, taking one last look at the bottom of his boat. He shined a flashlight into the void beneath his feet. What he was looking for lay cloaked in darkness, 70 feet below on the seabed, and it was time to start his descent. Lucas relieved the pressure on his eardrums continuously as he sank into the dark bluish haze. It took only seconds to reach a depth of 40 feet. If he was on target, the deck of the SS Yongala should be visible beneath him, but there was only blue in every direction. He swam in small zigzags, waiting for the ghost ship to emerge from the darkness. Something bumped Lucas's leg. He dropped the flashlight and turned toward the cold caress to see a dark shadow looming beside him. Wide-eyed and frightened, he tried to scream, jetting the regulator from his mouth while violently kicking to escape the creature. As the shadow moved away, Lucas looked into the darkness after it. Behind him, in front, above, below, it could be anywhere. He became aware of a burning in his lungs, and the panic increased. Reaching up and over with his right arm, he searched for the regulator, finally bumping his hand against a long hose that he pulled to his lips. Salt water invaded his mouth while he pressed the purge valve before taking a life-giving breath. Shivering with fear, Lucas retrieved the flashlight from its long cord and pointed it into the gloom. An enormous grouper hovered a few feet away, investigating the invader to its territory. Lucas's muscles relaxed. Not only was this hulking fish harmless, it was also a sign he was close to the artificial reef created by the wreckage of the Yongala. He followed the slow-moving fish, fanning his flashlight back and forth beneath him. 57:18. A chill ran up Lucas's spine when an enormous shape materialized in the void. The hollow remains of the majestic passenger ship loomed in front of him, concealed in corals and shadow. The gravesite of 122 souls lost at sea over 100 years ago. Lucas checked the full-spectrum camera, EVP recorder, an EMF meter on his belt. The familiar feeling of adrenaline coursed through his veins, driving him on. This was what he came for. Lucas swam over the coral-encrusted skeleton of rusted window frames, where tiny silver fish darted in and out of the darkness. He used landmarks along the ship in search of his destination. The aft mast, the engine room, and the galley were all visible before an inky black chasm near the bow appeared in the distance. The entrance to the front cargo hold, site of the only evident bones from a shipwreck. Lucas thrust forward eagerly and entered the forbidden remains of the SS Yongala, where the wide ocean void was replaced by flaky walls of eroded steel. His hands were steady as he checked the EMF meter. The lights still glowed green, nothing yet. 55:23. Lucas began his sweep of the room. He needed to save at least 10 minutes for a safe ascent, and the clock was ticking. Most of the contents within the cargo hold had long ago turned to sludge. The ground crawled with crustaceans and slithering sea snakes, but no matter how many times Lucas trekked back and forth, he saw no sign of human remains. His search continued so long, he began to worry the reports of bones might be a farce. He kept his breathing steady while methodically scanning the floor. Just when Lucas made up his mind to quit the cargo hold to search elsewhere, an unnaturally straight object reflected off the beam of light. He drew closer and saw a knob on the end of it. It must be the famed femur bone reported by divers before him. The adrenaline rush returned, and he kicked toward the human remains without hesitation. Taking advantage of his buoyancy, he hovered several feet over the femur bone while checking his equipment. It would be difficult to discern ghostly voices on an underwater recording, especially over the rumbling of his regulator, but he clicked on the EVP recorder anyway. The EMF meter was still in the green, so he brought the full-spectrum camera to his face. Lucas took a dozen pictures of the femur bone and its surroundings, then shined the light in every direction to take pictures of the entire cargo hold. The pitch blackness of confinement impeded his flashlight, allowing less illumination than the infinite blue of the open sea. In the darkness, he waited. Ghost hunting was about patience, and he had been to enough haunts without sight or sound of a ghost for hours that he was well practiced in tenacity. 42:28. The EMF lights blinked yellow. Lucas looked around expectantly, excited to get an alarm so quickly, but he was alone. The yellow lights turned back to green. 40:02. A scratching sound reverberated through the water. Lucas could not sense which direction it came from. 36:18. Lucas grew restless. He worried his dangerous descent had been in vain. 32:43. The EMF blipped yellow again, but only for a moment. 20 minutes left. The Yongala groaned, its steel frame protesting against the watery grave. It was followed by a childlike cry for help. Lucas's skin tingled, and he swung the flashlight around, catching nothing but blackness. He stared down at the EMF meter, but it had gone dead. He knocked the side of it with his flashlight, trying to coax it to life. With a burst of radiance, a dozen red pinprick lights flickered in the dark. Warmth vanished from the water, leaving it icy cold. Lucas saw nothing supernatural with his naked eye, but still snapped dozens of pictures, hoping a glowing human figure or mystical ring of light would show up when he developed the negatives in the darkroom. 2400 hours 12. The nauseating sensation of listing from one side to the other seized him. Childish cries for help came from every direction, and Lucas's blood chilled to the core. Despite his experience, Lucas's courage faltered. The EMF meter cranked back up, flashing red lights this time. Dread overcame him, and he headed for the hole in the deck, looking back one last time toward the abandoned bone. In the darkness, a pale face wavered like white silk in a breeze. Lucas stopped his ascent and grabbed the camera. This could be irrefutable proof of a haunting, guaranteeing him recognition in the ghost hunting community. The face disappeared in seconds, but Lucas hovered near the exit. Now that he was closer to his escape route, he felt safe and decided to stay a few more minutes. The sight of a ghost had reinvigorated him, but the lights on the EMF meter went green and the temperature of the tropical waters warmed. Shadows moved in the darkness, but when Lucas pointed his flashlight toward each anomaly, he saw only local sea creatures swimming past. A group of spotted manta rays glided overhead, just beyond the gaping hole of the cargo hold, causing a wavering in the still water. Lucas pointed his flashlight on their white undersides, watching the graceful undulation of their wings as they passed. 13:03. Time to leave. Disappointed that 10 minutes passed, and he had seen no more signs of the supernatural. Lucas took a final look around the cargo hold. He swept the darkness with his flashlight one last time, then conceded his defeat and swam toward the gaping exit above. Lucas jerked in surprise when light flooded the chamber. The temperature plummeted, and in his shock he missed the exit, hitting his head on the splintering roof. He blinked against the jolt of pain, then saw clearly the cargo hold as it was in 1911, with over 100 passengers crouched on the floor in fear. The Yongala listed severely, groaning as it swayed side to side. Lucas floated over the scene, an observer over the impossible vision of these doomed passengers, hiding from storm in the bowels of their ship. Wails and crying filled his ears, echoing like the hollow sound of waves in a conch shell. Vertigo ripped through Lucas's senses. He couldn't tell whether he was seeing the ghost ship or the real Yongala. Aiming for what he hoped was the exit, Lucas kicked against the freezing water, trying to escape the pleas for help below him. Time was running out. He burst into the warmth of the open sea and the sight of blue and yellow fish swimming. Through the gently waving fingers of a white coral brought him back to his senses. 7:20. Back in the open sea, speed was the enemy. He must ascend slowly to avoid the pressure change tearing his lungs to shreds. So he pushed his fears deep inside to be dealt with later. Lucas kicked gently against the water, watching the wreckage of the Yongala disappear beneath his feet. He kept an eye on his depth gauge, fighting the urge to sprint to the surface. Lucas hovered at 15 feet, his final safety stop, watching the timer to make sure he stayed a full 5 minutes. His heart had slowed to normal. The world returned to what it should be. And with nothing to occupy him but his thoughts, Lucas's mood shifted from fear to excitement. All of his equipment was intact, and he felt sure of proving the wreck was haunted. 3:23. With a final farewell to the deep blue beneath his feet, Lucas kicked toward the surface. He looked up, expecting the marquee-shaped underside of his boat to come into view. But instead he saw the pearled, smoky form of a 120-foot ghost ship hovering overhead. His EMF meter shook free of its own accord, floating to his face and reflecting a dozen blinking red lights across his mask. The phantom Yongala capsized in the calm water, struck by an invisible wave, and descended upon Lucas. Water whirlpooled in an indomitable current, dragging him relentlessly toward the seafloor. The enormous pressure in his chest and ears was crippling, and a rush of cold water accosted him as the ghost ship crashed into its 100-year-old remains and disappeared, leaving Lucas alone at the bottom of the ocean. 22. Lucas sat on the deck of the SS Yongala, 65 feet down, breathing his last thin gasp of air. If he rose to the surface, the pressure would tear through the soft tissue of his lungs, and he would die in agony alone on his boat. It was better to stay here. He released the waterproofing clasp on the EVP recorder, flooding its electronic insides with salt water, then popped open the film canister of his camera. The red sweep hand of the oxygen tank meter slipped to 0, and behind the plastic shield of his mask, Lucas's eyes filled with fear as he looked one last time at the endless expanse of blue overhead. The regulator slipped silently from his mouth. The beacon within. "Forgive me," as I'm never sure where to begin telling a story. I never was a storyteller. I tend to include useless information and jump around. So I will do my best to do this story justice, considering it happened to me and the ones I love, changing us forever. I never really gave it much thought. I was under the impression everyone had the abilities that I do. I would be reading an article in some teeny bopper magazine about a beloved pop star, and suddenly an image would enter my mind of a frazzled young woman with wild dark hair, panicking about the article being completed in time for publishing. I, of course, have no way to verify that this flash was at all what she was thinking as she wrote it, or if that even described her appearance. But it was eerie nonetheless. There's also my knowing the next song that would come on the radio, right down to humming any particular song, flipping on the radio and have it playing, sometimes right where my humming of the tune left off. Even now, as a habitual skeptic, I am willing to argue radio stations only play about 10 different songs all day. But again, still eerie. Part of the reason I always thought this was ordinary was because I would often come across people like me. My old band's lead guitarist who claimed to be able to hear people's thoughts. His daughter who said she could see auras. Gavin, my friend who sold me my house, who can sense the dead and help them pass on to the afterlife. My friend of over 10 years, Marcus, who always knows someone is about to call him before the phone even rings, and other things similar to my own experiences. There's also my lifelong friend Leah, who sees black shadows surrounding people who wish to do harm to others. A former co-worker named Nina, who, on a regular basis, had a burn sage in her home to stop something from throwing dishes around her kitchen at night. And last but not least, my husband. As a small child, Ethan climbed to the top of the stairs in his childhood home to find a man dressed in military fatigues and a bloody dot on his forehead who simply told him, "Don't do it." He was terrified but eventually forgot about it. Until one day, when he was 18, he looked up in a mirror while brushing his teeth and realized the guy on the stairs was himself. That year, he dropped out of ROTC. But as I grew older and got out in the world more, I found out I'm actually weird. Gavin said he rarely meets people like us. A staunch atheist. I don't even believe in this crap. Yet it was all around me and being told by people I respect and trust more than anyone. I fear I am once more adding too much information. Perhaps I feel a need to defend my experience, as I can almost hear the skeptics now. I'm a skeptic. I try to explain all this away. Hell, I wanted to. Since I can't speak for others, I might as well assume all those friends of mine are completely making all that stuff up. Fine with me, but I know what happened last year. I'll go ahead and tell it now. These abilities of mine waned as I got older, or I learned to ignore them. But after I had my son, things escalated quite quickly. He was, still is, a rather horrible sleeper. So I'll be the very first to say I was exhausted his first 6 months of life. Sleep deprivation can do some crazy things to you, but that doesn't explain everything. One night around midnight, I woke up and in the faint glow of the nightlight, I could see the bathrobes hanging on the back of my bedroom door, which meant the door was shut. We never shut our bedroom door at night. Ever. At the time, we didn't have a baby monitor, so it was a strict rule. Leave the door open. The bathrobes even helped it naturally swing open. So I was confused, but when I heard my child's screams, I instantly woke up completely. I bounded out of bed and growled to my husband, "Why would you shut the door?" He groggily insisted he hadn't. Annoyed, I ripped the door open and went across the hall to the baby's room. I bent over Noah's crib and searched for his pacifier, all the while shushing softly and trying to soothe him. That's when I heard it. Next to my ear, his heartbeat bear was going whoosha whoosha whoosha. I had turned that M, our F, our off at 8 p.m. It wasn't helping Noah sleep, and it was getting annoying having to constantly reset the touchy timer. If you didn't click it back into the off position and wait long enough before turning it back on, no sound would come out. If you twisted the dial too fast, no sound would come out. So I'd said F it and turned the damn thing off and left it off. Now let me be clear. At 4 months of age, Noah was not pulling to standing. He did not have the fine motor skills to hardly pick up his own pacifier yet. The idea of him standing up reaching through the crib slats to the back of the bear and blindly, but perfectly, turning the bear on and making sound come out is downright laughable. It's like something out of that stupid Baby Geniuses movie. I couldn't explain it. A brand new bear with practically new batteries that had never turned itself on before and couldn't have possibly clicked itself into the on position was beating next to my ear. Noah slept in our bed for the rest of that night. I contacted Gavin the next morning. I had spent all night trying to understand how my door had shut itself, how a bear could turn itself back on. I kept reluctantly coming to the same conclusion. I was desperate for an answer. Gavin said he could come over in a few days. Just in the meantime, tell it whoever it was to leave us alone. The next few days were excruciating. Sleepless nights and long days of feeling followed in my own home. A feeling like an idiot when telling an empty room to leave me alone. As Gavin's visit drew near, activity in the house ramped up. Shower curtain rings would make sliding sounds on the curtain rod, knocking on the living room walls. Noah crying and looking at something just past me. Gavin performed a ritual using a crystal to communicate with the spirit. Gavin claimed the spirit, a sad old man, had seen me and my baby out somewhere and attached himself to me. He hung out in the baby's room, but he liked my room the best. Gavin asked if he meant us any harm, if he meant to wake the baby. Both were answered by swinging the crystal to say no, but we got a yes when asked about my closed door and the bear. Gavin helped him pass on, and I watched as the crystal went from circling to a stop. Gavin had to come out one more time. We had invested in a video monitor at this point, and on one particularly hard evening, we sat in our son's pitch black room and watched on the monitor to see if he stirred after we set him down. I don't entirely remember why or what we were hoping to accomplish through this. I just know we were tired. Then in an instant things went from calm. He let us set him down to upsetting. Flying over his crib, 2 feet from where we stood, something appeared on the monitor for only a second. We had been in there for about 45 minutes at this point and knew there was no bug or fly. And besides, it didn't have wings. There was nothing physically there to explain what the hell had just appeared on the screen. Just a ball of white on a night vision monitor flying over Noah's bed. I angrily left the room in tears. Why? Why was this happening again? Gavin agreed to come over the very next night. I don't remember this visit as well. I mostly remember being angry and confused. Gavin said this time it was a young woman who had passed away before she could have a baby. She loved babies and was sad she could never have them. I should have felt bad for her. I should have had sympathy, but I was pissed. Not only were these events negatively affecting our lives, but they were also making me question everything I had held as true about the world. So Gavin had to sit me down and explain a few things. He told me I was what he called a lighthouse. Just as lighthouses guide sailors to land, I was a beacon of light to the spirits who are lost in between worlds. I'm someone who will notice them and lend some legitimacy to their confused state of existence. I will hear them knock on my walls and know it is them. They are not attaching themselves to me out of malice. They just want my help. I insisted I wanted nothing to do with them. Gavin understood, but said I could only ignore it so much, as there will always be at least a little light emanating from me. I don't tell anyone this story, and I am even submitting it anonymously, in the hopes that no one will ever attribute it to me. But I tell it because something has recently occurred to me, and I've decided the story must be told. These kinds of experiences did not happen to me before motherhood. I had funny things happen, like correctly guessing the song that was about to play, or unwittingly surrounding myself with people who hold unique abilities. But as far as I can tell, I never got visits from spirits. I never had to tell invisible entities to leave me alone before. It wasn't until Noah arrived on this earth that these things started happening in our home. And it finally hit me. As his mother, I must protect him, because I am not the lighthouse. He is. I never really gave it much thought. I was under the impression everyone had the abilities that I do. I would be reading an article in some teeny bopper magazine about a beloved pop star, and suddenly an image would enter my mind of a frazzled young woman with wild dark hair, panicking about the article being completed in time for publishing. I, of course, have no way to verify that this flash was at all what she was thinking as she wrote it, or if that even described her appearance. But it was eerie nonetheless. There is also my knowing the next song that would come on the radio, right down to humming any particular song, flipping on the radio and have it playing, sometimes right where my humming of the tune left off. Even now, as a habitual skeptic, I am willing to argue radio stations only play about 10 different songs all day. But again, still eerie. Part of the reason I always thought this was ordinary was because I would often come across people like me. My old band's lead guitarist who claimed to be able to hear people's thoughts. His daughter who said she could see auras. Gavin, my friend who sold me my house, who can sense the dead and help them pass on to the afterlife. My friend of over 10 years, Marcus, who always knows someone is about to call him before the phone even rings, and other things similar to my own experiences. There's also my lifelong friend Leah, who sees black shadows surrounding people who wish to do harm to others. A former co-worker named Nina, who, on a regular basis, had to burn sage at her home to stop something from throwing dishes around her kitchen at night. And last but not least, my husband. As a small child, Ethan climbed to the top of the stairs in his childhood home to find a man dressed in military fatigues and a bloody dot on his forehead who simply told him, "Don't do it." He was terrified but eventually forgot about it. Until one day when he was 18, he looked up in a mirror while brushing his teeth and realized the guy on the stairs was himself. That year, he dropped out of ROTC. But as I grew older and got out in the world more, I found out I'm actually weird. Gavin said he rarely meets people like us. A staunch atheist, I don't even believe in this crap. Yet it was all around me and being told by people I respect and trust more than anyone. I fear I am once more adding too much information. Perhaps I feel a need to defend my experience, as I can almost hear the skeptics now. I am a skeptic. I tried to explain all this away. Hell, I wanted to. Since I can't speak for others, I might as well assume all those friends of mine are completely making all that stuff up. Fine with me, but I know what happened last year. I'll go ahead and tell it now. Ridgefield Hollow. There are some places in Texas I advise you to go to. San Antonio, Austin, Poteet, Dallas, La Vernia. Just to name a few if you want to experience real Texas in a breathtaking way. And then there's Ridgefield Hollow, Texas, a place that I would never bring up in normal conversation. It's a place you don't go to. It's a place you drive far away from when nighttime falls. It's a place where your car stops and stalls, and you feel sweat beading down your neck as you try to jiggle the keys in fear. You don't go to Ridgefield Hollow, ever. Pull up Google Maps and try to find the town. Here's a hint. You won't. You'll go immediately to a marker labeled Ridgefield Hollow Meat Market, but no indicator that there's a town anywhere. There's no street name called Ridgefield Hollow Street or Avenue, just Ridgefield Hollow Meat Market. It's really more or less an abandoned town. Only about 10 people reside there, and country separates them all in between. There's a meat market, like I said, and an old dance hall that people used to go to back in the 1970s. There used to be a school who resided there, but they merged with Denton Falls ISD way back in the 1970s. Even the history of Ridgefield Hollow is lackluster. A simple Polish town that was established as a rural trading point for settlers. As they headed to San Antonio, no battles were fought there, no historical significance, except technically one. The story of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a fabricated story based on Ed Gein, who murdered and sewed skin of women together. Urban legend steadfastly holds onto the belief that the real incident of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre happened in Denton Falls, Texas. This isn't true because, in reality, it was Ridgefield Hollow where the legend began. Denton Falls got attached to it because Ridgefield Hollow lived and died with a very difficult sounding name. When the movie came out, the locals murmured and whispered among themselves. That Ridgefield Hollow's secret and dark past had been taken by Hollywood, and transformed into a slasher film complete with a cannibal family and bloody corpses that line the grounds. It's a coincidence. The film had nothing to do with the town. But have you ever seen something that was so eerily coincidental and similar that you couldn't help but feel a connection? Even the lonely, isolated feeling of the landscape felt like the harsh, hard ground of the ghost town. Ridgefield Hollow is home to a violent clan of inbred cannibals that live in the countryside, kidnapping and raping victims before eating them alive. If the victims didn't already will themselves to die by that time. Anyway, nobody exactly knows where they came from, but rumor is that they were simply left behind when people started to move away. It's agreed that they're Polish descent and otherwise unintelligent humans. But that's all anyone can say. Right before Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out, a young, naked, and bloody man drove his car into a street post in Denton Falls, Texas, and got out, screaming wildly in the dark of the night. The police and ambulance came, bringing him to a hospital center in Willow Creek Medical. After sedating him enough to clean him, the nurses and doctors found irregularities. He was bruised and bloodied, and his flesh had been stripped on his thighs and buttocks, like a knife had been skinning him. He had no tongue and was unable to speak. His wrists were hanging off the joint, as if they had been bound so tightly that it was essentially severing them clean off. His ankles were shattered and broken, and it seemed like it was pure will and luck that he even made it that far to Denton Falls, in a car nonetheless. The police detectives gave him a pen and paper and asked him what happened. The only thing he wrote was Ridgefield Hollow, and he died a day later from injuries and infections. His body was studied by the medical examiner of San Antonio, who took interest in the case, and the medical examiner promptly remarked that this would be his last autopsy, as this was the worst he'd seen. Shortly after he signed the papers, the medical examiner resigned and moved out of Texas. The medical examiner reported that the young man had been held captive for a week or so, bound by something tight like rope or chains. His circulation was cut off in many parts of the body, requiring amputation of the fingers and toes. There were several infections raging in his body that would have eventually, by miracle, had not killed him. He was also tested positive for tetanus, and fragments of rusty metal were found in his bloodstream. He was dehydrated, starved, and raped repeatedly in the rectum, mouth, and a hole in the base of his spine was found to be filled with semen. Shockingly, this did not result in paralysis, and the doctors still can't explain it. His tongue was missing, and the doctor presumed that it was cut using the same rusty blade as the fragments found in the bloodstream, as well as the skinning of his thighs and buttocks. He was also tested positive for HIV, which wound up quarantining the hospital. Blood, traces of seminal fluid, and rotted meat were found in his stomach, as well as a wristwatch. The guess is as good as anyone else's on how this poor man escaped his captors. The doctor theorized that maybe he freed himself by dislocating his wrists and slipping out of his bonds. How he was able to run was pure will to escape and survive. In the car he might have stolen on a highway or from his captors. An informal police report differs, suggesting the man was meant to be tossed in the river nearby and overpowered his captors while in the car and operated it into a frenzy. The weirder mystery was the word Ridgefield Hollow. It wasn't any difficulty to see that he meant Ridgefield Hollow, Texas, so the police began a search out there, starting with the Ridgefield Hollow Meat Market. There, all they found was an elderly couple running the store as usual and selling pork rinds in plastic bags. A detective bought one to eat on the search, and eventually, that was all the search actually accomplished. Nothing was found and nothing was gained. Nobody in the small town had seen or heard of the man, and nobody reported a car missing or stolen. The detectives returned several times back over a course of months, attempting to secure more information. However, they were largely unsuccessful and considered the case had run cold. The last time they were there, they went back into the meat market. A young girl of maybe 6 or 7 was sitting behind the counter eating a type of Polish candy. One of the detectives decided to go ahead and try to talk to her. He first bought a bag of pork rinds to try and start conversation, which she returned with energetic favor. She seemed pleasant enough, as any 6-year-old would be. Then he offered her one of his pork rinds to curry favor. She declined. "Mama says I only eat those if they're made of piggies," she said. The detective laughed a bit and told her that they were made of pig, hence pork rinds. She shook her head. "No, they're not. I seen Grandpa make them. He gets a shipment of skin every month. And while they're screaming and crying and hollering, he takes the skin right off and tosses it in the fryer." Immediately, the detectives became unsettled and left, opting to hand over their pork rinds to the lab. They then dispatched and attempted to find the old couple. Every time they go to the meat market, it's closed. And every time they try to find them, everyone in the town doesn't remember them. After some digging through the history books and birth certificates to locate the identity of the couple, the detectives learn a terrifying fact. Everyone in Ridgefield Hollow is related. There's no deviancy in the family trees. Any settlers who immigrated there were blemished out mysteriously. The results come back. Now, this was back in the day where forensics did not exist, so DNA testing was a science fiction fantasy. The inspectors determined the pork rinds were of untraceable origin, but were definitely not made of pork or any hog products. This resulted in a search and seizure of the town. The town of Denton Falls dispatched and requested help of several towns to seize all people of Ridgefield Hollow. People were arrested, and kids were transferred to Denton Falls, where they could not be in their family's possession. Violence and fights broke out. Homes were destroyed and torn apart in ravaged police searches. In one home, they found equipment with noticeable blood. In another, fragments and bone were found. In yet another, teeth were buried under the soft ground. Nobody was talking, and nobody was saying anything. This was before DNA, so the police couldn't determine what the blood was. The household claimed they butchered their own livestock. The teeth came from burying it for the tooth fairy. Bones and fragments were from slaying pigs with hammers. The rabbit hole went too deep, and the police didn't know what to do. So they shut down Ridgefield Hollow and ferried the kids to the Denton Falls ISD schools. When they could no longer hold the townspeople in custody, the townspeople moved out of the homes and went deeper into the country, so they couldn't be found. Then the movie came out, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and everyone was utterly convinced someone in Ridgefield Hollow sold the story. Of course, it was just coincidence. The two are unrelated, and the case of Ridgefield Hollow never went solved. By that time, everyone knew to stay away from Ridgefield Hollow, and the kids who were shipped to the Denton Falls schools were bullied so hard that eventually they too left for the isolated countryside. The thing is, now Ridgefield Hollow is trying to open up the doors again. The dance hall is open, and the meat market is under new management. Ridgefield Hollow is trying to sell itself as a historic town and bring business back to the ghost town. People have gone there for the dances and insist that there's a homely, cowboy-like charm to the place, and the pork rinds can't be beat. And the nice old couple who runs the meat market are just the best people, I hear. Echoes from the Hollow House. There is a house that I spent a good portion of my childhood in, and the house that I, to this day, although no longer living in it, will always call my true home. I have many fond childhood memories in that house. It's where our family lived the longest. What I'm about to describe are all real events experienced in this house by me and the rest of my family. These are true accounts and are not exaggerated in any way. We've always known that house was haunted, not to the point of being insane and deadly, like you see in the movies, but plenty of unnerving things have happened there. Let me start by telling you a little bit about the house. The first thing you should know is that it's very old, from the 1800s. It used to be a hotel. When my family bought it, I, being the youngest, was only a little kid. We remodeled that house and even extended it a little. It took a very long time, but eventually that old, rickety house from the 1800s got a brand new modern makeover. However, the things lingering in that house which we couldn't see stayed. At first, it started out with smaller things. My older brother, Ethan, would occasionally be falling asleep in his room upstairs, which was always cold, and someone would blow in his ear. He would open his eyes and look, but of course, nobody would be there. We were told by a few different people that a cranky old woman used to live there who would sit out rocking in her rocking chair on the balcony, which we removed, yelling at people who would walk by. There was one night during which one of my older sisters, Sarah, was sleeping on the couch in the living room, and she started hearing a creaking sound. She described it as wood creaking rhythmically, coming from a spot just outside one of the upstairs windows, which used to be a door that led out to the balcony that no longer exists. One time, when I was little, being all adventurous like I was, I took a digital camera up to the furnished attic at night, where it was quiet and pitch black. I made my way into the middle of the room, held up the camera, and started snapping pictures. I could only see what I was taking pictures of when the camera would flash. And then afterwards, when I looked at the taken picture on the digital screen, I eventually saw in one of the pictures I had taken while I was facing a wall, a small black spot in the middle of the screen. I took another picture pointing the same way and saw that the spot was still there, but had grown. To me, it looked like some sort of portal to nothingness, a small void of blackness in the room, something that sucked up the light of the flash and didn't reflect any back. As I took more and more pictures of it, it got bigger and bigger until it was almost covering the entire camera lens, just blackness. It then occurred to me that rather than growing, this black mass actually seemed to be getting closer and closer to the camera lens. I don't remember anything past that point. I must have run downstairs. Things started getting more physical. I was once in the shower when the water suddenly got cold, and I looked back to find that the knob had been turned significantly behind my back. At night, when alone, we each began to hear loud footsteps above us. In the biggest room on the second floor, you would only ever hear them if you were alone, or were the only one awake. Once they were so heavy, it sounded like there was an elephant or something up there, and the ceiling creaked so loud that I half expected it to cave in on me. My sisters, Sarah and Emily, shared that room for a long time. Eventually, one of them moved out. Only one remained in it. When she was walking around up there, you could hear her footsteps clearly. The only problem was, I would also hear those footsteps walking around when she wasn't home. Sometimes I was home alone. My mom, Margaret, was awakened one night while my friend Ben was sleeping over to loud footsteps running up and down the stairs. According to her, it sounded like more than one person and was practically a stampede. She jumped out of bed, angry at us being up so late causing such a racket, opened her bedroom door into the room where you can see the bottom of the stairs. But there was only dead silence and darkness. Everything was still. She thought we must have run upstairs, and she had just missed us, so she went up the stairs and opened the door to the room we were sleeping in, which was my sister's old room, now vacant after they had both moved out. But we were sound asleep. She thought maybe we were faking it, and inspected us closer, and realized that no, we were clearly out cold, and had been that way for quite a while. She mentioned all of this to us the next day, maybe still wanting to think that it was us, but we of course had no idea what she was talking about. One night, I was just about to fall asleep when I heard a man's voice right in my face whisper the word bang. It pulled me out of my sleep, making my eyes shoot open and look around the dark room to find nothing. After a minute, still being tired, I brushed it off and closed my eyes again. I started to drift back to sleep when the voice once again quietly whispered bang in my face. I opened my eyes again to once again find nothing. This happened a total of 3 times before I was finally able to fall asleep. So many things happen in that house. But after so many years of constant activity, you get used to it, and things that used to frighten you begin to simply annoy you. Sometimes, if you were alone and there was a persistent noise being made, where no other person was, like the squeezing and popping sound of plastic water bottles in the kitchen, you could simply look in that direction and say, "Stop it." And sometimes it would just stop. We were eventually able to get the things that were dwelling in that house out. And the activity, after years of persistence, stopped altogether. As I said earlier, I still consider the house my one and only true home, and I always will. I spent years growing up there as a child with my family, and two of my close friends, as well as family friends. Despite the occasional paranormal activity, I have many good memories of that place. It is where my mind will always wander back to whenever I think home.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.